Hello, everyone. I'm Leslie Rohde, and welcome to another episode of Ask the Lawyers. Our topic today, drunk driving accidents. Every 50 minutes in the United States, if you can believe, someone dies in a drunk driving accident. Well, our guest today is Trent Shuping, a partner in the Atlanta-based Warshower Law Group. Trent was named a rising star by Super Lawyers in 2018 and focuses his practice on motor vehicle accidents. Trent, welcome.
Thank you.
Let's just start with telling people, what should a person do if he or she is hit by a drunk driver?
Sure, Leslie. The first thing that someone involved in a wreck with a drunk driver wants to do are generally the things that you'd want to do in any type of wreck, whether the other driver is drunk or not. Obviously, first steps, make sure that you can get to a place of safety if you're on the road or something like that. You're going to want to make sure that you call the police, most assuredly, particularly in a case where the other driver is drunk. If the other driver is visibly drunk, it may change how you interact with them. For instance, you may not want to start asking them for their information, but you're going to want to do those types of normal things. You're going to want to exchange information, make sure that the police come and that they prepare a report. You're going to want to also notify your own insurance company immediately. This is particularly important because lots of times drunk drivers, statistics show that there are a smaller number of people who account for the larger percentage of drunk driving episodes. And so these folks are not likely to have a lot of insurance, which means it's even more likely than a normal accident that your own underinsured motorist coverage will come into play. So you're going to make sure that you notify your own insurance company and let them know what happened, let them know that you think the other driver may have been intoxicated. You're also going to want to follow up. You're going to want to get a police report and find out that information. The other thing that's going to be important, particularly with the drunk driver, is that you're probably going to want to need some legal help because there are certain situations that come into play when you have a drunk driver as concerns your uninsured motorist coverage, as well as the damages that might be available to you, that you're probably going to need the help of an experienced attorney to investigate what happened, as well as make sure that you get all of the damages that you're entitled to.
Does a prosecutor or a district attorney represent victims of drunk drivers?
No, and that's sometimes a common misperception. The district attorney or the prosecutor generally represents the interest of the state, of society at large, in prosecuting that person and trying to punish the drunk driver for whatever crime they may have committed. They do not represent the civil interests of the victim. Now, sometimes through that process, there may be some sort of restitution. They may contact the victim. Various places have victims advocate. But that said, the prosecutor or the DA does not have an attorney-client relationship with the actual victim. That's why it's important for someone who's been injured by a drunk driver or who's had a family member killed or injured by a drunk driver to go out and seek representation so that as that process proceeds, they have someone whose sole interest in that is not to society at large, but directly to them and their family.
You mentioned the civil part of this. Do you need a civil attorney if you think you might be a victim of a drunk driving accident?
You do, because there's two elements of dealing with the drunk driver. The first, and this refers back to what the prosecutor or the district attorney is going to handle. They're seeking to impose some sort of punishment, which is meant to punish them for that instance and hopefully deter them from doing such a thing in the future. That alone does not necessarily help the victim of that crime, who may have medical expenses, who may be losing income because they can't or able to work because of their injuries, who's suffering pain, or possibly in the case of if someone's been killed, a family who's lost a loved one. So and the role of the civil attorney will be to step into that gap and try and recover whatever damages are available from the drunk driver, their insurance company, or if they're underinsured, which is, again, often the case, from the victim's own insurance company, as well as also, and we may discuss this a little bit later, but as well as looking at other avenues to recover from other people who might have been involved in the chain of events that led to that person choosing to drive their vehicle intoxicated.
I see. Okay, so a drunk driver, a victim of a drunk driver, could that person receive damages in a criminal and civil case then?
From my experience, I've not seen many people get actual recoveries through the criminal process. At times, courts will order restitution, but there really is nobody who is in charge of really making sure that those damages are presented, they're awarded. It just is not a system that's really designed to compensate people. We have a separate system, the civil side, which is designed to compensate people, which is designed to allow victims of drunk driving to pursue their damages. Now, the damages that a victim of drunk driving is allowed to pursue are in some ways similar to damages in any kind of wreck where someone else is at fault. The victim of a drunk driver would be entitled to recover the expenses for their medical bills, and those would be the ones that they incurred already, as well as ones that they're likely to incur in the future. They would be able to recover for any lost wages, which again would go backwards from the date to the date of the event, and would also include any lost wages that they're likely to incur going forward. They're also entitled to recover what we call general damages, and that would refer to pain and suffering, and that can refer to anything from just the loss of enjoyment if you're unable to work, being unable to engage in your hobbies, being unable to interact with your family the way you would like to, being able to interact with your spouse on all the various levels that occurs. And so those damages, again, are available in any sort of normal car wreck where someone is at fault. Now, when you have a drunk driver that's involved, it also opens up some new possibilities, which would include things like punitive damages. And punitive damages are imposed upon the drunk driver with the goal of deterring them and punishing them for doing that. And so while there are criminal penalties, there also are civil penalties that can be imposed to help punish and deter them. And that's one of the things that makes drunk driving cases particularly unique, because you need to, one, be aware that those damages might be available there, and two, an experienced drunk driving attorney, civil lawyer, can help the victim figure out whether or not those are available, whether or not they're worth seeking, and whether or not the overall strategy for trying to get the most compensation includes seeking punitive damages.
Sounds like a wide variety of damages as well that could be available in many different cases.
There are, and it's important to think through strategically, because in lots of cases, punitive damages will be excluded from the drunk driver's insurance policy. Now, they are always going to be excluded from an underinsured or uninsured motorist coverage. So, for instance, if a person is hit by a drunk driver and that drunk driver has only $25,000 in coverage, it may or may not even matter whether punitive damages are sought. And there may be a situation where if there's no insurance covered for punitive damages, sometimes it's better not to actively seek them, but rather just to present the facts to the jury, and the jury becoming aware that the person who caused the accident was drunk is more likely to increase the amounts that they award for the other damages. And so sometimes that's a better strategy than flat out asking for punitive damages.
So what if a person who's driving that car is not prosecuted? Maybe that person is not found criminally cause the accident. Like, if a person is not found guilty, you don't have the criminal part. Do you still have a civil case in this instance?
Absolutely. The criminal case is not, the civil case rather is not contingent upon the outcome of the criminal case. And so that does happen sometimes, where for whatever reason the criminal case is tossed out, or perhaps they're able to obtain a slick criminal defense lawyer who's able to beat the case. That person is still going to be responsible for the wreck for a number of reasons. First, even if they weren't convicted of driving drunk, they may still be guilty of negligence that caused the wreck. So, for instance, if someone rear-ended you, whether they're drunk or not, that is a negligent act, and you're going to be entitled to recover your damages from that wreck. Second, just because the jury did not convict them of the criminal offense of drunk driving or driving while under the influence, does not mean that you can't put up that evidence at a civil trial. And there may be different standards of admissibility between the civil trial and the criminal trial. There may be evidence that perhaps the prosecutor wasn't allowed to use to convict them of a crime that may be available to a civil attorney to show a jury that the reason why this person caused this wreck is because they were intoxicated.
What can a family member do? Say someone has died in a drunk driving accident. Is there anything that their family members can do after the fact?
Sure, and it's a horrible situation for a family to be in. I saw a statistic, I believe, in Georgia that 1 out of every 3 fatal crashes in the state occur because someone was driving drunk. And it's a very difficult time for the family. I've worked with several families that are going through that process and trying to grieve, trying to make last arrangements, trying to deal with the person's estate, and knowing that the accident was caused because of someone else's decisions to drive drunk, or perhaps because of some establishment's decision to serve somebody who they had reason to believe was going to drive drunk. It's just a very painful time. But there are some things that are open to them. And going back to the question of what should you do when it's a family member, particularly who's been injured, it's particularly important to talk to a experienced attorney early. because there's different kind of cases that come into play. In addition to the claim against the drunk driver, who will always be, responsible for the wreck. There may also be other claims against third parties, and by this I'm referring to dram shop cases. Sometimes, if the circumstances warrant it, there may be a case against a restaurant or a bar, convenience store, even sometimes just a party host, if that person continued to serve the drunk driver after they knew or should have known that that person was intoxicated and they were likely to get behind the wheel. The damages available to the family of someone who's been killed by a drunk driver are a little bit different than damages we discussed earlier. In Georgia, the damages that are available for a wrongful death are based on the value of the person's life, whoever died. It's the value of their life to themselves. So the damages are not based upon how much the family misses that person, but sort of the flip side of that, they're based on how much that person misses out by not being able to be with this family that loves them. By contacting an experienced civil attorney who has experience with these types of cases, they can make sure that, number one, that the case is properly worked up, that things are investigated so that evidence doesn't go missing, so that evidence doesn't deteriorate just with the loss of time. Two, to make sure that the right parties are contacted, that the right parties are put on notice, both to preserve evidence and to let them know that a lawsuit is coming. And then three, to make sure that every available avenue of coverage is considered.
Trent, what do you want people watching to take away from this conversation?
I think the important thing to remember in cases, if you've been involved in a wreck with a drunk driver or a loved one has been involved in a wreck with a drunk driver, is that there are a couple of things that make these cases unique from other accidents. And those include the type of damages that might be available, the effect that those damages will have on insurance coverage, the fact that other people other than simply the drunk driver may be responsible, and the fact that evidence is going to be deteriorating, by the minute as the time progresses from the wreck. And each of those four factors, I think, are reasons why it's oftentimes important to seek the advice of an experienced attorney early on to make sure that someone is there to sort of look at holistically and make sure that evidence is preserved and maintained, that evidence is discovered, to make sure that the various insurance coverages that are available are explored, to make sure that the right parties are identified and that the right damages are sought. Anytime you have a case with one of those four things, I think it makes sense to consult an attorney, and particularly in a drug driving case where you usually are going to have all four of them, even more so.
Thank you so much for all that advice, Trent Shuping with Warshauer Law Group in Atlanta. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
We want to remind everyone to subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss another episode of Ask the Lawyers. I'm Leslie Rohde for AskTheLawyers.com, where you can choose a lawyer that lawyers choose.